They were already counting the dead when the stars screamed. Across the broken orbit of the Kalari's refuge ring, fires burned in silent spirals. Metal drifted where homes once floated. Emergency lights blinked weakly in the vacuum, like dying heartbeats. Every species sheltering inside the ring knew the truth now. No one was coming. Help was late. Hope was finished. Administrator Yarlan Rose stood at the center of the command sphere, his thin hands shaking as he watched the tactical map collapse in real time. The ring had been built as a neutral haven, far from borders and wars. Scholars, traders, refugees, and healers from dozens of worlds had trusted its promise of safety. That promise had lasted exactly 9 hours. The Korath Armada had arrived without warning. 6 war cruisers, black and angular, their hulls carved with conquest marks. They did not send demands. They did not negotiate. They disabled defenses, destroyed escape vectors, and began systematic boarding operations. The Korath did not conquer planets. They harvested populations. Inside the ring, panic had given way to quiet terror. Corridors were packed with civilians sitting shoulder to shoulder, conserving oxygen. Parents held children close, whispering stories that had no endings. Medics worked without supplies. Security teams were gone, overrun in the first wave. Yarlan forced himself to breathe slowly. As the senior administrator, he had sent distress signals in every known frequency. The replies had been brief, apologetic, and useless. Too far. Too risky. Not our conflict. Even the major powers had turned away. One final signal remained unanswered. Humanity. They had sent the call out of obligation, not belief. Humans were new, loud, emotional, and unpredictable. Their fleets were small compared to the ancient empires. Their technology was powerful but inefficient. They fought fiercely, but they were always late to galactic politics. Yarlan had already accepted that no reply would come. The main display flickered as another section of the ring went dark. Administrator, a trembling voice said from the sensor station. The Korath are cutting toward Habitat Cluster 7. That cluster held 12,000 civilians. Yarlan closed his eyes. Begin internal lockdown. Seal what you can. The sensor officer hesitated. Sir, that will trap them. I know. There was no good choice left. The Korath commander finally opened a channel. His image filled the room, a towering figure with layered armor fused directly into grey flesh. His eyes were calm, bored. You have delayed longer than necessary, the alien said. Your population will now be processed in stages. Compliance will reduce casualties. Yarlan met the creature's gaze. You will not leave this place untouched. The Korath commander made a sound that might have been laughter. We already have. The channel closed. Moments later, the ring shook as boarding spikes slammed into its outer hull. Hull alarms screamed. Gravity fluctuated. Somewhere far away, people began to die. Yarlan sank into his chair. This was the end. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. 3 times. Steady. Controlled. The sensor officer looked up, confused. That wasn't damage. What was it? Yarlan asked. The officer's fingers flew across the console. His eyes widened. Sir, there's a mass signature forming beyond the debris field. The Korath ships reacted instantly. Their formation shifted. Weapons charged. Something was arriving. Space twisted. Not a smooth emergence like standard drives, but a violent tear, as if reality itself had been punched open. Energy rippled outward, scattering wreckage. The sensors screamed warnings they could not translate. And then it came through. A single ship. It was smaller than the Korath cruisers, rough in shape, scarred and asymmetrical. Its hull was dark steel, patched and reinforced in places that suggested survival, not design. Weapon mounts bristled along its sides, missile racks, rail cannons, and systems no one could identify. It didn't slow. It didn't hide. It accelerated straight toward the Armada. Across every remaining speaker in the ring, sound exploded. Not a message. Not a warning. Music. Heavy percussion thundered like a heartbeat. A raw, defiant rhythm that seemed to shake the walls. Over it, a human voice roared, not in fear, not in rage, but in certainty. The Korath commander shouted orders. Too late. The human ship fired. Not in neat volleys, but in layered chaos, electronic warfare first. Korath targeting systems glitched. Sensors lied. Shields failed to sync. Then came the kinetic strike. A rail slug punched through the nearest cruiser, tearing it open from bow to core. The ship broke apart in silence. The ring erupted in stunned disbelief. One ship, the sensor officer whispered. It's just one ship. Yarlan stared at the display, his pulse hammering. Open a channel. Now. The human vessel answered immediately. A human appeared on screen. Her face was calm, scarred, focused. No ceremony. No fear. This is Captain Mara Keen of the human warship Resolute, she said. We received your distress call. Yarlan's voice broke. You're too late. Captain Keen's lips curved into a thin smile. No, she said. We're right on time. The Resolute surged forward, engines howling like a living thing, and charged directly into the heart of the Korath fleet. And for the first time since the invasion began, the people of the ring felt something dangerous awaken inside them. Hope. The Korath had fought older empires. They had crushed armored fleets. They had harvested cities that screamed for mercy. They had never fought a ship that wanted to die if it meant taking them with it. The human warship Resolute ripped through the debris field like a thrown blade. Its engines burned bright, leaving a thin white trail that looked almost like a scar across space. The Korath formation tightened, 6 ships shifting to surround the lone attacker. They believed in rules, angles, range, discipline. They believed a single ship was a problem to be solved. Captain Mara Keen watched their movement with steady eyes. She didn't care about their formation. She cared about their fear. Inside the refuge ring, Administrator Yarlan Rowe stood frozen at the command display. The image of the Resolute pulsed in the center of the tactical map like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Around him, his staff had gathered, faces lifted, breathing shallow as if any sound might break whatever miracle they were watching. Why would they come alone? One medic whispered. Yarlan didn't answer because he didn't know. He only knew the Korath borders were still inside the station. In Habitat Cluster 7, in the medical wings, in the markets. They were cutting doors, dragging people out, marking them for transport. Even if the humans won the space battle, the ring could still die from the inside. Patch me to internal security, Yarlan ordered. Any surviving units? A crackle of static answered. Then a voice, strained and hoarse. Security lead Ven. We're pinned in corridor D7. They're advancing. Hold, Yarlan said, though the word sounded like a cruel joke. Help is here. Help. Ven coughed. We are out of weapons. Yarlan looked back at the tactical display. The Resolute was already inside the Korath firing arc energy beams flared from the nearest cruiser, clean lines of pale light that would normally slice a ship in half. But the human ship didn't dodge like a civilized craft. It moved like an animal. It rolled hard, not smooth, but violent. It vented vapor from side thrusters in bursts that looked wrong and reckless. One beam grazed the hull and ripped away armor plating. Another struck near the engine line, and the Resolute shuddered. Instead of retreating, it accelerated. The human ship was on fire and still charging. Mara Keen's bridge rattled as the hull took another hit. Warning lights blinked red. A junior officer shouted damage reports. The scent of overheated metal filled the air. Mara didn't flinch. Release the decoys, she said. Decoys, the weapons officer repeated. They'll burn right through. Release them anyway. From the underside of the Resolute, dozens of small objects launched. They were not missiles. They were not drones. They were simple, dumb metal shells, empty, cheap, and fast. They scattered like seeds. The Korath targeting systems reacted automatically. Their weapons switched to the new threats. Their formations adjusted to intercept. And that was the point. Because the shells weren't meant to survive. They were meant to be seen. Inside each shell was a burst emitter, primitive by galactic standards, built from old human tech that did not care about elegance. It screamed nonsense into every frequency at once. It flooded Korath sensors with false heat signatures, false mass readings, false engine echoes. The Korath gunners fired into ghosts. Mara watched their beams carve through empty space. Now, she said quietly. The Resolute fired its real weapon. Not the cannons. Not the missiles. The Ring's command crew saw it as a strange pulse, a ripple that expanded outward from the human ship like a shockwave in water. Yarlan's sensor officer cried out. They've hit them with a signal attack. It's scrambling their synchronization. The Korath shields flickered. For an instant, the nearest cruiser's defensive field dropped. The Resolute slammed a kinetic barrage into the exposed hull. Rail slugs struck like thrown planets. The cruiser cracked open, spilling atmosphere and debris. Then its reactor went critical, and it erupted in a silent bloom of light. The refuge ring's command sphere filled with stunned voices. That's two, someone breathed. But the Korath were not helpless. Their commander was not a fool. He saw the pattern. He saw the trick. And he adapted. The remaining cruisers spread out. They stopped trying to surround the Resolute. Instead, they turned their weapons toward the refuge ring. Yarlan's blood turned cold. They're aiming at us, the sensor officer said, voice rising. They're going to destroy the habitats. Mara Keen saw it too. She didn't curse. She didn't panic. She simply leaned forward. Helm, she said, put us between them and the ring. The helm officer stared at her. Captain, that puts us in a crossfire. Yes, Mara said. That's why we're doing it. The Resolute swung hard and placed itself in the line of fire. The Korath beams struck the human ship's shields, then its hull, then its armor. Panels burned away. One of the side thruster arrays exploded. The ship staggered. Still it held. In the refuge ring, Yarlan felt something twist inside him. He had watched fleets retreat from danger. He had watched leaders sacrifice strangers for safety. He had never seen anyone throw their own ship into the path of death to protect people they didn't even know. Open channel, Yarlan said again, voice urgent. Captain Keen, you can't. Her image appeared, and behind her the bridge shook with impact. We can, she said. We came for this. But why? Yarlan asked, his voice breaking. You don't even know us. Mara's eyes flicked toward a display off-screen, where casualty counts rolled. When she spoke again, her voice was colder. We know what the Korath do, she said. We've read the reports. We've seen what the galaxy lets them get away with. Another hit rocked her ship. Someone shouted that the forward rail cannon was offline. Mara didn't look away. We also know what happens when everyone decides it's not their problem, she said. So today, it is our problem. The channel cut as the Resolute fired again. The Korath commander did not rage. He did not shout. He simply sent a new order, and the remaining cruisers launched boarding torpedoes toward the human ship. Mara watched the incoming objects on her screen. They want to take us alive, she said. Her first officer swallowed. Captain, we're outnumbered. Mara nodded once. Good. That means they think this is still normal. She tapped the console and sent a single packet of data outward, toward the ring. Yarlan's system chimed. A file transfer. The sensor officer blinked. It's from the human ship. Yarlan opened it. It was not a request. It was an instruction set. A crude map of the refuge ring's internal systems, overlays of vent controls, gravity modules, atmospheric pressure nodes, and emergency bulkhead triggers. Under it was one sentence, short and clear. You don't need soldiers. You need doors, air, and timing. Yarlan's mind reeled. Humans had just arrived and already understood the ring systems well enough to weaponize them. How did they? An engineer began. But Yarlan already knew the answer, and it made his spine go cold. Humans didn't need permission to learn. They learned fast. They learned like survival depended on it. He looked at the map again and realized what Mara was offering. A chance to fight back. Inside the ring, the Korath boarders were advancing toward the command sphere. Their armor clanked in the corridors like slow doom. Their weapons hissed. Their voices echoed, calm and certain. They believed the refuge ring was helpless. They believed its people were prey. Yarlan straightened. He turned to the engineering chief. "Can you reroute gravity control to specific corridor nodes?" The chief hesitated. "Yes, but it's not designed for tactical use." Yarlan's eyes hardened. Neither were fire extinguishers. He turned to communications. "Can you trigger emergency seals in a wave pattern, timed to isolate their squads?" "Yes," the officer said, voice trembling. Yarlan held up the human file. "Then we do it. We follow this. We don't fight them like soldiers. We fight them like a station." In space, the Resolute took another hit. Its hull glowed red in places. Its shields were almost gone. And still it moved. Still it fired. Still it howled. The Korath commander watched the human ship bleed and did not understand why it didn't break. He believed humanity was too late. He believed the lone warship was desperate. He did not yet realize the truth. The Resolute wasn't desperate. It was buying time. And inside the refuge ring, a peaceful population that had never known war began turning corridors into traps, air into weapons, and fear into a plan. The Korath boarding squads advanced with practiced certainty. They moved in tight formations, armored bodies filling the corridors of the refuge ring. Their claws scraped against metal floors. Their helmets projected tactical overlays that marked civilians as resources and obstacles as irrelevant. This was familiar work. This was easy. They did not hurry. That was their first mistake. At the edge of Corridor D7, Squad Leader Krath paused. His helmet display flickered for a fraction of a second, then stabilized. He dismissed it as interference from damaged systems. Behind him, one of his soldiers tilted its head. Gravity variance detected. Krath snorted. "Primitive station. Continue." They took 3 more steps. Then gravity vanished. Not gently. Not gradually. One moment, the corridor pulled them down. The next, it hurled them sideways. The Korath slammed into walls and ceilings as the gravity vector rotated 90 degrees. Massive bodies collided. Armor cracked. One soldier's neural lash discharged wildly, burning a groove into the bulkhead. Before they could recover, the gravity flipped again. And again. Inside the command sphere, Administrator Yarlan Rowe watched the feeds with clenched hands. His staff worked in focused silence, executing the human-provided instructions with growing confidence. Corridor D7 isolated, an engineer reported. Atmospheric pressure dropping. "Vent it," Yarlan said. The air screamed out of the sealed corridor in a violent rush. The Korath were strong, but strength meant nothing against physics. 2 were slammed into an emergency hatch and crushed. Another was dragged screaming into the void when the outer seal blew. The survivors tried to anchor themselves. The floor turned off. Across the ring, similar scenes unfolded. In Habitat Cluster 5, a boarding squad advanced toward a shelter bay. The lights cut out, plunging the corridor into darkness. The Korath switched to thermal vision. They saw nothing. The station's heat had been rerouted. Cold flooded the corridor. Temperature plummeted in seconds. Their armor systems struggled to compensate. Joints stiffened. Movement slowed. Then the lights snapped back on. The gravity surged. And a wall, once just a wall, slammed inward as emergency bulkheads triggered in sequence. The Korath were crushed between moving steel, their armor finally proving useless. Inside the refuge ring, fear began to change shape. Civilians watched from sealed compartments as the monsters that had terrified them were dragged, crushed, frozen, or blown into space by the station itself. Parents covered children's eyes, but the children still heard the sounds. And for the first time, those sounds were not one-sided. Security lead Ven staggered through a smoke-filled corridor, clutching a fractured arm. He stared at the sealed bulkhead ahead of him, listening to the silence beyond. "They're gone," he said into his communicator, disbelief heavy in his voice. "All of them." Yarlan exhaled slowly. "Good work. Fall back to the core." Ven hesitated. "Administrator, we're not just surviving anymore." Yarlan looked at the tactical overlay. Red icons, Korath borders, were vanishing. Slowly. Methodically. "No," Yarlan said quietly. "We're learning." In space, the Resolute was learning too. Captain Mara Keen stood strapped into her command chair as another impact rocked the ship. One of the Korath boarding torpedoes slammed into the hull and latched on. Warning alarms screamed. "Boarding breach imminent," the computer announced. Mara didn't look away from the forward display. "Let them in." Her first officer stared at her. "Captain." "We don't have enough hull left to play defense," Mara said. "We play surprise." The torpedo cut through. Korath soldiers spilled onto the Resolute's lower deck, weapons raised, expecting panicked resistance. Instead, they stepped into silence. The lights were off. The deck plates were wet. And the gravity was wrong. Mara watched the internal feed as the boarding squad advanced. Their heavy steps splashed in pooled liquid, coolant mixed with water. One slipped. Then another. Their formation broke. Then the deck electrified. Not enough to kill. Enough to drop them. As the Korath struggled, disoriented, the gravity reversed. The liquid they had slipped on lifted, forming a floating cloud of droplets. The Korath flailed, confused, weapons drifting from their grasp. Then the airlocks opened. The Resolute did not vent them into space. It vented them into the engine wash. The ship shuddered as its engines flared. The feed cut out in a burst of static. Mara exhaled through her nose. "Seal it. Reroute power to weapons." The weapons officer nodded. "Captain, they're hesitating." On the main display, the remaining Korath cruisers had pulled back. Their formation was no longer aggressive. It was defensive. They were confused. They were recalculating. The Korath commander stared at his tactical data and felt something unfamiliar creep into his thoughts. Doubt. The humans were not fighting correctly. They did not preserve assets. They did not retreat when damaged. They did not follow expected escalation patterns. They treated ships like tools, not treasures. They treated environments like weapons. This was not honorable combat. This was survival warfare. He opened a channel. "Human vessel," he said. "You are damaged beyond recovery. Withdraw. This conflict does not concern you." Mara Keen appeared on the screen, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. She smiled. "You came to harvest people," she said. "That makes it our concern." "You cannot win," the commander said. "You are one ship." Mara leaned back. "You still think this is about ships?" She cut the channel. At that exact moment, inside the refuge ring, Yarlan gave a quiet order. "Activate the final sequence." Across the station, emergency systems triggered in a precise pattern. Corridors shifted. Bulkheads retracted. Gravity stabilized, then spiked. The remaining Korath boarders found themselves herded, unknowingly, toward one central junction. A junction that connected directly to an unfinished expansion ring. An expansion ring with no life support. Yarlan watched the sensors as dozens of red icons clustered together. "Now," he said. The seals opened. The Korath were thrown into empty space in a single, silent wave. In the command sphere, no one cheered. They simply stared. The monsters were gone. Not all of them. Not yet. But enough. In space, the Resolute surged forward again, engine screaming. Its hull was scarred. Its systems were failing. But it was still alive. And now, it was not alone. The refuge ring's remaining defense systems, mining lasers, construction drones, maneuvering thrusters, came online, repurposed and coordinated. The Korath commander watched the station itself begin to move. Not flee. Aim. He finally understood. This was not a rescue. This was an alliance forged in fire. And humanity had not arrived too late. Humanity had arrived exactly when fear was ready to become something else. The Korath commander watched the tactical field shift, and for the first time in his long career, he felt the battle slipping beyond calculation. The refuge ring was no longer passive. Its rotation adjusted by fractions of a degree, turning debris fields into moving barriers. Mining lasers once meant for carving asteroids now tracked like predators, burning through sensor arrays and weapon mounts. Construction drones swarmed damaged Korath hulls, not to repair, but to tear, cutting cables, clogging vents, jamming exposed systems with molten slag. This was not how stations behaved. This was how traps closed. Human vessel, the commander transmitted again, forcing control into his voice. You are prolonging inevitable loss. Withdraw, and we may spare those who remain. The Resolute drifted momentarily, its engines dimming as if exhausted. Fires burned openly along its flank. To Korath eyes, it finally looked like prey at the end of its strength. Captain Mara Keen wiped blood from her brow and allowed herself a breath. Administrator Rowe, she said over private channel, this is where it gets loud. Yarlan swallowed. Captain, you're barely holding together. Mara smiled faintly. That's because you still think I'm the point. Before Yarlan could ask, the stars changed. Far beyond the debris field, space began to shimmer. Not one rupture. Not two. Dozens. The Korath sensors screamed as signatures appeared everywhere at once, weak at first, scattered, chaotic. Too many to be coincidence. Too disorganized to be a fleet. The commander's breath hitched. Decoys. No. Something else. The Resolute's engines flared again, but this time not in acceleration. They pulsed in a steady rhythm, broadcasting a signal that rippled through subspace like a heartbeat. Mara's voice cut across every open frequency. Attention, Korath Dominion, she said calmly. You're tracking a distraction. The first human ship emerged. Then another. Then another. Not warships. Converted freighters. Survey craft. Heavy transports. Mining barges armored with welded plating and bristling with improvised weapons. None matched. None moved in formation. They arrived at odd angles, with violent subspace scars, engines roaring in protest. A swarm. Hundreds of them. The Korath commander staggered back in disbelief. Impossible, your fleet signatures. We don't move fleets the way you do, Mara said. We move people. Inside the refuge ring, gasps echoed as the display filled with human vessels of every shape imaginable. Some were ancient. Some looked barely spaceworthy. All of them were accelerating toward the battlefield. Yarlan's voice trembled. You said you came alone. Mara's expression softened. I did. So they wouldn't see the rest coming. The truth unfolded with brutal clarity. The Resolute hadn't been a lone savior. It had been a signal flare. Humanity didn't send fleets to fight wars. They sent warnings. Across the battlefield, human ships unleashed chaos. Electronic warfare flooded Korath systems. Old nuclear missiles, cheap, terrifyingly effective, detonated near cruisers, overwhelming shields through raw force. Boarding pods launched not to capture, but to sabotage, their crews tearing through systems and vanishing before retaliation could lock on. The Korath formation shattered. They were built for domination, not disorder. The commander issued retreat orders, but subspace lanes collapsed as human ships deliberately burned out jump points. Escape vectors vanished one by one. You don't understand, the commander snarled, broadcasting blindly. This is not profit. This is punishment. Mara answered without hesitation. Yes. The refuge ring joined the assault. Its thrusters fired in short bursts, shifting its massive bulk just enough to alter firing lines. Mining lasers carved through already weakened hulls. Drones latched onto cruisers and detonated internal charges. The Korath lost their third ship. Then their fourth. Panic spread through their ranks, not fear of death, but fear of unpredictability. Humans didn't fight to win territory. They fought to end threats. The commander watched his armada break apart and understood, far too late, the mistake his people had made. They had mistaken youth for weakness. They had mistaken emotion for instability. They had mistaken creativity for chaos. The Resolute, burning and scarred, surged forward one final time. Its remaining rail cannon fired at point-blank range into the Korath command ship's exposed core. The explosion lit the void. When the light faded, the battlefield was quiet. Debris drifted. Human ships slowed, engines cooling. Inside the refuge ring, silence reigned, then it shattered as people began to cry, laugh, and collapse in relief. Strangers embraced. Children stared at the stars in awe. The nightmare was over. Yarlan leaned against the console, tears streaming freely. "Captain Keen, you saved us." Mara shook her head. "No. You saved yourselves. We just showed you how." She looked out at the gathered human ships. "And now," she added softly, "the galaxy is going to remember why they don't hunt us." The wreckage drifted for days. Long after the weapons fell silent, pieces of shattered Korath cruisers continued to tumble through space, their once proud hulls reduced to silent proof that something fundamental had changed. Salvage beacons blinked weakly. Fires burned themselves out. The void, indifferent as ever, watched it all. Inside the refuge ring, life slowly returned to motion. Medical bays overflowed, but this time with relief instead of terror. Engineers worked without stopping, patching hull breaches and restoring systems that had never been meant to survive a war. Families searched for one another, some finding joy, others only names on casualty lists. Administrator Yarlan Rowe walked the corridors every day. He spoke to everyone who would speak to him. He listened more than he talked. He watched children draw pictures of strange human ships and jagged alien monsters, their crane wars already turning into stories. Stories always came first. The humans did not stay long. Their ships docked only long enough to transfer supplies, medical aid, and technical teams. They shared food that tasted too strong and drinks that burned going down. They laughed loudly, even when exhausted. They treated trauma with humor and loss with quiet respect. Captain Mara Keen met Yarlan one last time in the command sphere. The Resolute hung outside the viewport, wrapped in repair scaffolds, its scars clearly visible. It looked less like a hero now and more like what it truly was, a survivor. "You should stay," Yarlan said. "At least until the Concord arrives." Mara shook her head. "They'll arrive to make reports. We'll leave before they start asking for ownership." Yarlan smiled sadly. "The galaxy will demand explanations." "They always do," Mara replied. "That's how they avoid changing." Yarlan hesitated, then asked the question that had burned in him since the battle ended. "Why did you really come?" Mara considered him for a long moment. "Because the Korath were on a list," she said. "Not an official one. A human one." Yarlan frowned. "A list?" Mara nodded. "Every time someone screams into the dark and no one answers, humans notice. We record it. We remember who ignored it. And we remember who caused it." Yarlan felt a chill. "And when that list gets long enough..." Mara's expression hardened, not with anger, but with certainty. "We stop talking." The Concord fleet arrived 3 days later. 12 pristine warships, banners bright, weapons untouched by combat. Their admirals expressed shock, outrage, and deep concern. They asked for data. They asked for statements. They asked how a neutral station had turned into a battlefield. They did not ask why no one had come when help was first requested. By then, the humans were already gone. The official reports would later describe the incident as an unexpected multi-faction engagement resulting in the neutralization of a hostile force. Unofficially, something else spread. Merchants whispered in docking bays about Korath ships that never returned. Refugees told stories of a single human warship screaming out of nothing, refusing to die. Engineers shared schematics of how a peaceful station had become a weapon in hours. And soldiers, real soldiers, listened carefully. Across the galaxy, slaver fleets adjusted their routes. Predatory empires paused expansion plans. Admirals began adding new variables into their models. Human unpredictability. Human escalation. Human memory. On a distant world, a Korath survivor stood before his leaders and tried to explain. He spoke of music in the void, of weapons made from environment and timing, of humans who arrived late on purpose. They dismissed him. They always did. Months later, the refuge ring was rebuilt. Not as it was before. It kept its neutral status, but its systems were redesigned with new redundancies. Corridors could still be homes, but now they could also be defenses. Gravity controls were given manual overrides. Emergency protocols were rewritten with a single human phrase translated into dozens of languages. If it can move, it can fight. Administrator Yarlan Rowe remained in his position, though he was offered safer roles elsewhere. When asked why, he always gave the same answer. Because safety is a promise, he said. And promises mean nothing if you don't know how to defend them. Far from the ring, Captain Mara Keen stood on the bridge of a different ship now. Larger. Newer. Still rough around the edges. A junior officer approached her console. Captain, long-range sensors detected a Korath remnant group near the outer trade lanes. Mara didn't smile. She didn't need to. Send the warning packet, she said. The officer hesitated. And if they don't respond? Mara looked out at the stars, cold, distant, watching. Then they'll hear the music. The ship turned toward the void, engines warming, system sinking. Somewhere out there, civilization still believed humanity was too emotional, too young, too chaotic to matter. They believed help would always be too late. They were wrong. Because humans did not rush to save the galaxy. They waited. They watched. And when they finally came, they came howling. Not to conquer. Not to rule. But to make sure the darkness learned one simple truth. Humanity remembers.